aloha, and welcome back to another Maestro's Vibe. My name is Juan Jefe Espinal, back with another highly esteemed guest. Actually, the person who put us on the map, some people would say. I'm honored to be back here with Suevon Lee. She's going to be discussing some of her journalistic work throughout all these years and some future work that's coming up. Thank y'all again for joining us with our co-hosts.
Yeah, this is Kev on the ones and twos, and I'm with
Karina Hernandez. Welcome back.
Welcome to another Maestro's Vibe. And just like Juan said, we are here with another highly esteemed guest, Suevon Lee. For all of our listeners out there, can you explain a little bit about your role in terms of education?
Sure. Well, thank you so much, you guys, for having me on here. I feel somewhat like an interloper because I'm not a teacher, but I admire your work and your podcast and how you kind of really started this up and kept it going for so long. So props to you, and thank you for having me on. As you were saying, I am a reporter for Honolulu Civil Beat, and I cover education, and I have covered education ever since I started here, which was back in June 2017. So my beat basically covers the Hawaii Department of Education with a little bit of some private schools reporting, especially now with the pandemic. Everything is sort of everyone has faced sort of similar challenges. But generally I write about K-12 education, pre-K as well, and just what's taking place in our schools and what are some of the issues that people should know about. So that touches upon a lot of different things like the budget and legislative decisions and innovative things happening and projects and solutions-based journalism. And yeah, one of the things I love most about this job is just talking to people and finding out what they're up to and what they're seeing on the ground. Because I know oftentimes when you're covering a big massive state agency like the DOE, you can kind of get lost in the morass of all of sort of the bureaucratic speak, but it's really talking to teachers and principals even that to kind of hear what they're noticing in their classroom is what I think is really important for others to know. So that's kind of my job in a nutshell.
And in case our listeners haven't checked it out, 2 years ago, some people might say arguably the most important Honolulu Civil Beat article came out. That one where you were talking about those 3 teachers making school cool to talk about. You had us on there. You wrote an article about us. You told the world about us. And we are greatly appreciative of that because it made me feel super special. Like I mean it when I started off with you put us on the map. I was like, I showed my family back in New York. I was like, look, I'm in the paper looking like this. And I was like, and it was cool to be able to be verified and validated that way. What brought you to that beat,
Yeah. Oh, well, okay. So what brought me to the education beat? Honestly, it was what Civil Beat job opening was all about at the time. I'm not from Hawaii, so for those of you who don't know, I grew up on the mainland, and I had never thought I would live here ever. Never in my wildest dreams did I think I'd live here, but I always knew about Civil Beat as a nonprofit investigative news organization that I had always admired from afar. So in the journalism world, we're pretty familiar with what's out there and what news outlets are kind of making a splash and doing work that you admire. And so when I saw that they were hiring for an education reporter, it's a beat that I hadn't covered before in my years in this industry. I thought, okay, well, I'll give it a shot. So that's kind of how I stumbled upon it, and they hired me for whatever reason. No, I'm just kidding. They hired me, and then now here I am. But I did want to go back to that story that I wrote about your podcast. I was thinking back before we started as far as how I even came to know about it. And I honestly think just sort of one of those serendipitous like interactions that we all had in real life. I think we met in Honolulu during like a press conference for that teacher housing incentive program, done by Landed, the company that's based out in the Bay Area. And I think that some of you spoke, and I spoke to some of you afterwards. And it might have been there that we first met, or it might have been something else that I was reading about, or I know that you guys presented at that cool like panel thing with like TFA Hawaii and the thing that Hawaii kids can put on. So it might have been there that the idea was first sparked, but whatever the case, I do know that I first met you guys in real life before I interviewed you. So it was nice to make that connection. And I'm sad that we can't have those like in real life connections anymore, because those oftentimes lead to like a spark of a story idea. So I'm just glad that um, um, we were able to connect after the fact and then have a great conversation, which eventually led to that article. And all I did was really just draw attention to the great work that you guys are already doing. So thank you for those kind words, Juan, but it's all you guys.
Thank you. And you mentioned that before writing educational pieces, you were covering a different field. I have high school students that are interested in journalism, and I am wondering, like, what advice do you have, or if you could share a little bit more about your journalistic journey?
Yeah, absolutely. I'd love to. That's so great that your high schoolers are interested in this career field. We need more journalists of a young age interested in this. So I worked for my high school paper. Speaking of high school, like going way back, I worked for my high school paper. I wrote for a college publication. I'd always been interested in sort of writing and reading and current events. And the more I did it and the longer I did it, I realized it's really sort of gives you access into an arena that allows you to ask a lot of questions. And sometimes, these are questions that not many people would want to answer, especially if you're working in state government or government of any kind. However, these are questions that are important to ask because they help inform people who live in the community about what's taking place in their community. So for me, my initial interest in journalism just came from a love of just reading and writing, and I majored in the humanities. I was an English major. I was not a journalism major, but I eventually went back for my master's in journalism at Northwestern, which in Chicago, which has a program in which most of your master's training is really just like in the field. Like we were just writing stories and collecting clips, and we use that to build up our portfolio, which we would use for, applying to jobs. So it wasn't so much theory based or classroom based work. We were like literally working as student journalists and writing for something called the Medill Wire Service, which would fan out to various Illinois based, Chicago based publications if they wanted to pick up our stories. That was really good training. But I do have to say that for any young people out there who want to continue on this path, is just read a lot, just read a ton, read anything you can get your hands on. And that includes, news and current events and journalistic outlets and fiction and nonfiction, because all of that stuff is going to come into play when you sit down and eventually string some sentences together. And it's really to just be aware of what's going on in your community. Hawaii, I know, is a very place-based, community-oriented place. And despite the fact that it has this tourism sheen to those on the outside, any of us who've lived here for more than a few years, right, know that it's so much more than just Waikiki and beachfronts and hotels. So yeah, so I think that just being interested in what's taking place, whether it's your local elections or how schools are weathering this pandemic, or how, you know, the mayor is handling homelessness, what policies are in place, just things like that. I mean, it's really just a lot of talk story. Listen to it too. Don't just talk story, listen to the stories, I guess. And that's one way to really become invested as a budding journalist. So sorry, that was very long-winded.
No, no, you are a listener. For anyone who isn't aware, like I've been at board meetings, boring other departmental meet. Like I've been at meetings that you just show up and you're always there asking questions, gathering information, and it's cool because like it's what you said. It's like you're there listening to the information that's related to the decisions that matter for our community, and that is so cool. You've got the inside scoop. Like that to me is such a unique perspective on our society, and thinking about that, you know what I mean, and thinking about everything that's going on. uh, what are you hopeful for?
Hmm. Hopeful. What am I hopeful for? Wow. Um, you know, well, let me think about this one. I am hopeful, and this might sound a little corny, but honestly, like the young people here and the dreams that they hold and the ambitions that they hold. And so when, you know, Karina talks about her students being interested in journalism, or you guys talking about students who aim to dream bigger, or when I interview teachers who talk about their other student or talk about their students wanting to just, you know, wanting to know what's out there and know what's possible for their own lives. I'm hopeful that the inspiration is already being cultivated, and I think it's because of teachers who can bring their own perspective and worldview into the classroom, and who can bring their own sort of life experiences to young people who can then look up to them and trust them and think, wow, well, this is possible for me. I can, I can do this. I can pursue this career path. I can move to place X and always come back if they can, right? So I guess it's those kinds of connections that are being forged every day that I hope will build, I don't know, a more harmonious society. I think right now there's so much noise out there in the civil discourse. Um, there's um, there's not very many positive examples being led from the very top, and I'm talking about our administration, you know, in the White House and currently. And so I think anytime you can combat those negative examples or portrayals or expressions that are just not positive, um, the better off we'll be. So that's why I think teachers particularly have such a outsized important role right now to really be a model example of what one could aspire to be. And I don't think that it's necessarily all professional based or achievement based. It's like character based and model behavior, to just be a good person, to be an ethical person, to treat others well. Um, and I think it really starts with that.
I think you hit such a good point when you're talking about like it all starts with relationships, and you're in a role where relationships are super important for your experience as a journalist. And when I'm thinking about that and thinking about a prior guest that we had on, a Kauai teacher, we talked about reimagining schools, and part of the work that you're doing right now is a new segment that you're bringing out, talking about new classrooms. And I'm wondering, through that piece that you're working on, what is it that you've learned about the new classroom in these times?
Sure. Yeah. So the new classroom is a new series we're running over at Civil Beat to kind of discuss how families are weathering the pandemic by um, helping their kids or coaching their kids through school at home. So more often than not, the new classroom right now looks like school at home. And, I know there's a total array of experiences right now as far as it comes to pandemic learning. I know some students are more fortunate than others because they have mom and dad helping them and facilitating them through. Others are more left up to their own devices. I mean, I'm just hearing stories that are totally across the spectrum of how involved or not involved schooling is right now for them. And I know there's just a host of challenges, especially when it comes to connectivity and availability of device and all of that stuff. But what I'm hearing right now just really is it's hard. um, the new classroom series is really so far right now parent driven, so I'm getting a lot of what they're experiencing with the challenges that they're facing. I mean, my latest story to come out of this a couple of days ago was about a military family who just moved here from Japan, and the mom was telling me about how with her two children, they're young in elementary grades, like I think kindergarten and like third grade or so, they were going back to school in Japan like regularly. And the school year there is a little different, but it really did overlap with like the onset of the pandemic, the worldwide pandemic. So these kids were going to school in Japan like back in June, July, August, right? While we in the US are in summer break at that time, they were going back on the Japan schedule. And she was just she was describing that model to me as so ideal. Like, of course, there was a little bit of nervousness to begin with, but it was so ideal for her to have them be at school from 8 in the morning till 3 in the afternoon, just going about their routine. But when they came to Oahu and moved right before the first quarter started here in August, she just felt very helpless because she was not only navigating choosing a new school. I think she wanted to GE into this particular elementary school rather than the one where their neighborhood is at. And so she was navigating that, plus like a virtual orientation, plus like helping her daughter with navigating online schooling. And it just, if you read the story, you can tell that the frustration is quite evident, and the little kid is just, reduced to tears because it's very frustrating being in front of his screens for so long. I mean, as adults, I think we're used to it, or at least in my profession, I'm used to it, but I can't imagine what it's like for a teacher or a little kid or a middle schooler or a high schooler to just be learning through a screen. Like, in any way, shape, or form, it's got to be tough. It might be novel at first and interesting and exotic at first for them, but after a month or two of this, I can imagine that screen fatigue sets in. So I'd be curious to know what strategies some of you all are using, like you guys are using, to navigate that new format and how you're building relationships with your kids.
Yeah, I think it starts with what you just said, the building relationships. Like for me personally, I teach in a fifth grade classroom that's an inclusion classroom. So I have all modalities of learners in my classroom that I need to really take into consideration. And with that, I understand that relationships are key. So we explore and build community daily. It's not like we just jump into language arts or math and that's it, right? So like we spend about half an hour every day building community in different ways. We have a segment that I've talked about earlier in one of our episodes this in this season where we explore embrace and diversity. So that's still ongoing in my classroom. It's a daily thing that we do. And we do a check-in every day, a would you rather question, just to have the kids build that sense of community. And I'm happy to say that the kids are sharing more and more with that focus, and I think that it's just about building a routine that the kids can feel safe and know what's to come. And that's part of what I hope that I'm doing. And I'm hopeful that it's going well. Of course, there's always hiccups, but we're
Yeah.
learning.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think like what you said about building that foundation, knowing that when they do, I guess, log in or check in, they know to expect to see you and your face, and then slowly you build up relationship with questions like that, and then they get more comfortable, more familiar with you, for sure. I think we all have to sort of adjust in the ways that we can and sort of start building up from that foundation. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Checking in is super important. I do schedules for the week and I post them, and always tell the kids to check the schedule. What are we doing? And I'm on the meet even when they have a study hall, because they know that they can come in and ask questions and just share how they're doing with me. But just like Kev said, that check-in component is so important, because just this past week, our check-in was like, how is this class going? And they started sharing, and they were very open. Some of them, it's going a little fast. Some of them said it's just right. And I kept, asking the other kids who haven't shared yet, like, I'm waiting for your response. And then a student said, also, Miss, this is nothing against you. You're a great person. Like, this is just how we feel about the class. And it was like, yes, I understand that, but thank you for also speaking it out and saying, hey, it's not you, Ms. Hernandez. Like, we appreciate you as a person. Our time together is precious. But if you're asking that question of how are we really doing with the content, it's a lot. And taking that into consideration, then deciding together, all right, so then what I'm hearing, most of the class is feeling this way. What are some solutions about it? And then other students begin to say, oh, we should review this lesson, or we should take a study hall day. And then it becomes like, okay, this is our learning. And it's not like, oh, they said that, but here's the lesson anyway. No, it was a time for us to reflect and say, all right, well, some of us need more time. And if those of us that are done and are keeping up, there are other activities that we can, work on, such as vocabulary. And that has been really, really great. And just how the students email me to let me know, I like this lesson. I will need a couple more days, please. And it's like, advocacy. I telling them that they need to speak up, because in the real world, you need to advocate for yourself. And I think that's going well. And I am moving away from trying to keep up with that pacing. Like, I need to do this by this day. So that's something differently, rather like knowing this is what we need to do. This is what we're going to do. What is your input? How can we make this better? And then collaborating to make that lesson and that unit better. That's what's been different, and it's been working well. But those check-ins are so important.
That's great. Yeah. Yeah.
And I think personally, I think screen fatigue comes from bad content.
Mm.
And because even before this pandemic, we could have been on Netflix binge for hours with no screen fatigue. And the reason why is because it's something good, it's something you like to watch. People say that reaching people through a screen is difficult. Now, I argue to say when I was growing up, and I say this a lot, and Kevin Crean will tell you, Big Bird reached right through that screen and grabbed me in. Mr. Rogers reached right through and grabbed me in. There is capacity to reach in, grab someone's attention, and teach them something that matters to you. There is a huge capacity to do that. There's research to do that. There's ways for us teachers to become better presenters of information. And I think that's something we need to look at. And I think there's capacity for that. I think checking in builds that. It treats people like people, it makes people, there's a reason that people check in every day to radio shows. There's a reason that people would check in every day to Blues Clues. I think we just got to get better. We got to become more fun. We have to make school something that is cool. And it's complex because cool is ever changing. And it's an ephemeral concept that we are always going to be chasing. So I found like some success making my own content and then sharing that with the kids in the kitchen, and then having them actually cook. But that was a unique opportunity in the summer that I had to create that. And it was built on literacy. It was built on kitchen skills. It was called Eola Pono and Mr. E. And it was a cool opportunity to reach the kids in the kitchen. But I think it's tough. It's tough, but I think it can be done. And I think the reason you get screen fatigue is because we're putting out some boring stuff right now.
That's a really good perspective, Juan. You're right. Because there are times where, I'll be honest, my lessons are really fun and the kids are like, oh, wow, that went by fast. And then there are times where maybe I didn't have enough time to pimp out my lesson, as I like to call it. And then it just becomes like, okay, this is cool. This is a good activity, but the time does feel a little longer. So I hear you, Juan.
Yeah.
It's hard though. I mean, any YouTube creator will tell you, any reporter will tell you, any artist will tell you, consistent content is difficult. Like that is difficult. And teachers have not really been asked to be that creative, I think. I think we've been asked to be soldiers and to follow rules and to make sure that we follow curriculum. And there really isn't a curriculum that's been developed that's successful and fun and reaches our kids yet. So we're kind of in the Wild West, and creativity isn't always something that's been cultivated, I think. So I really applaud you again, and I applaud you in what you do. I applaud that, and I applaud Honolulu Civil Beat. Please check it out. Like, they are putting out investigative journalism. Like, that's rare. Like, I don't know if y'all know about this journalistic landscape. I don't know if our listeners know. I know we got a lot of educators, I know we got a lot of students, but that journalistic landscape has not really been friendly towards investigative journalism, actually talking to people, putting out consistent content like that. So just thank you for what you do. Like I really appreciate it.
Thank you for being such a supporter and such an avid reader. I think it's just a testament to just our entire operation, just my colleagues. They're super hardworking and talented people, so I'm just lucky to be able to work with them. And I love that passion that you guys bring about as far as talking about creative content and the fact that it's not necessarily the medium, it's what's being delivered across the medium that has to be better. So yeah, I mean, I agree, like as a kid who grew up on Sesame Street and Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood and 3-2-1 Contact and all of those kinds of shows growing up, I agree, things can be riveting and educational, and it can be delivered via video or online or whatnot. So, just kudos to you for constantly striving to come up with such creative content. I wish I could sit in on your classes if you would allow me.
Actually, I would love to take you up on that. In December, or my unit 4, I titled it Building Cultural Bridges, right? So unit 1, we learn about identity and perspectives. Unit 2 is all about the power of argument. Unit 3, it's analyzing literature and things fall apart. And then unit 4 is like bringing it all together. And I would love for you to come and share some of what you do with the students. So definitely going to email you about it.
Absolutely. Let's set it up.
Thank you.
Really love the way that you talk about Civil Beat being a collaborative network. I think that that's when we're thinking about creativity and we're thinking about building this content that Juan is talking about. It has to be collaborative. And with that, we need administrators that allow people to be creative. So right here, I want to give a shout out to Janice Blaber, because she and her staff have started the journey of leaving what's the asynchronous Acellus. They're leaving Acellus and they're creating their own content. So that's a really cool journey to see people undertaking right now. And I think that we need to be sharing that. And that's why I bring it up, because I think that the more that we share about it and the more collaborative that we are, the more creativity that we'll have. And hopefully we'll have that engaging content that proves to be meaningful for us and our students.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think it was back in April where I interviewed actually Juan.
Yeah, that was the day.
About for a story entitled "What Should Hawaii's Schools Look Like After the Pandemic?" And I think that one of the quotes that I used by you, Juan, was, "This is the best of times and this is the worst of times." And I just loved that quote because I think it really resonated with those who are following just the craziness that was school and education back then, because this is like right in the beginning of everything. And I think you really articulated it really well as far as this is the time to rip up that playbook, to kind of reimagine what schools could be. So yeah, thanks for being open to talking to me about that story.
Thank you again. It was so cool that you were on the cusp of that conversation. And I think you've learned a lot. I appreciate what you do. You've taught us a lot. in our community a lot. As we get to the close of this time here, and again, appreciative of your time on this Aloha Sunday, do you have any advice for
Of
any
what
of our
kind?
listeners?
Of what kind? I have plenty of advice. What, like steer me into a certain direction? Like what? Like what sort of advice?
I
I
think
don't know.
that especially with the investigative reporting that you're doing currently with the new classroom and getting that really great perspective of what I think as of our customers with parents being at the forefront of what you're doing right now and their perspective, what advice can you give educators from a parent lens that would
Mhm.
help us make their experience better in this current
Yeah.
time?
Okay, okay, sure. Well, I can tell you this, like all of the parents I've spoken to, like 9 out of 10, literally have had nothing but praise for the Hawaii teachers, really. Like even though they'll be like dissing Acellus, right? Or like dissing some other component about the state education system, they're always like, but my kid's teacher is great, and I please, like I want to emphasize that point. So I haven't heard anything but good things about the effort and the extra mile that you guys are all going right now. So I can tell you from a parent perspective, from what I'm hearing, they're nothing but complimentary towards the educators. They understand how difficult this situation is right now. They understand you're doing your best. So I'd say just keep doing what you're doing. Um, so I think where it does get a little bit more frayed is kind of um, kind of butting up against those systems of it's very hierarchical in the DOE, and like you're encountering sort of more like institutional blocks and challenges. So I think when you get to those kind of levels and they don't get the answers that they need, that's when they feel frustrated, right? So in that sense, I I don't know what to tell them other than, I'm going to keep asking the questions. I'm going to keep doing my job. I'm going to keep reporting on decisions that are being made, and so you can be a better informed citizen of this place that you live in, and you deserve it. Everyone deserves it to know what's going on.
And I apologize, my question was a little bit gray before. Thank you, Kevin, for clarifying. I have some advice. That is excellent advice for teachers and families. I've got 3 pieces of advice as we start to wrap up here. First of all, your story matters, listeners. So if you're listening, get in touch with Civil Beat and share your story for this new series, The New Classroom, written by an literary expert, Suevon Lee, right here. Thank you so much for joining us today. The second piece of advice I have for y'all is to go ahead and, well, rate us, review us, leave us 5 stars here at Maestro's Vibe. And lastly, have an awesome rest of your day. Suevon, we really appreciate having you on our podcast here today. And I would like to start saying we ho before throwing it over there to y'all.
Thank you, Juan. And thank you so much for joining us and sharing everything that you have. We appreciate just being with us from the beginning and also still being part of our journey. We thank you, and we look forward to all of the stories that you will continue to write.
Thank you so much for having me on. This was a lot of fun. Thanks so much, guys.